evening. My very special guest this evening is Rose Silver. She is currently serving as special counsel to the Board of Supervisors, working under the Civil Division of the County Attorney's Office. Rose Silver was the first woman graduate at the U of A Law School. There are many, many firsts that Rose has done. Very colorful life, which she will share some of it with us this evening. So welcome to the show, Rose.
Thank you.
I guess we just plain old ought to start as at the U of A and how you were the first woman graduate of the law school.
I came from Detroit. I was about 18 or 19 years old at the time, and I had been a year in law school at the University of Detroit and had top grades and brought my grades here to the law school here. Well, the law school here was in a very small building, unpainted inside, with one of those little $2.50 stoves. The class consisted of, the whole school consisted of very few people, and I was the only woman to register there. And the so-called dean of the law school told me, "We don't like women law students here." I presented him with my grades and work from the University of Detroit, which was 97 on a scale of 100. And he
Not
said,
bad for openers.
And he said, "We don't show these to your professors now because they may be very disappointed. We just don't like women in the law school." Well, the law school was very tiny, and he was not really a typical law professor. He was just a teacher at the college for a long time. And another young lady started, but she lasted about 3 weeks and quit. I went through the whole 3 years, and at the end of the 3 years, when I was about to graduate, this same dean called me in and said, "Rose, I want to give you a compliment." So I wait for the compliment, and he says, "Well, you think like a man." And now we have decided now to give you credit for the year of work that you brought here. Well, what good was the credit going to do me then? I had finished 3 years already, ready to take the bar. So I was a little angry, and angry with this professor anyway. So I said to him, "Well, Dean Fechtley, you said I think like a man. Now, if I were a man, I would tell you what you could do with that years of credit now, because it's entirely useless to me." And then I took the bar and passed it. I was the second highest in the bar. The first person that was the highest was a federal court reporter, and this was the 8th bar he was taking throughout the country. Now then I went looking for a job, and that was impossible. It was by this time in the 1930s and 31, in the height of the Depression, where the average lawyer was doing his own typing and his own bookkeeping. Hardly any of them had secretaries, except a few of the big firms. I went to one big firm that is still in existence today and is much, much bigger than it was in those days, and I was told by the head partner there that they couldn't possibly employ a woman lawyer because they'd have to put her in the back room somewhere where the public couldn't see her. But he said, "We will send you our overflow business." And he did, and it formed a very fine nucleus for my independent law practice, which I started in a little office that cost $25 a month rent. Started with bookshelves for about $10 and old law books for about $10, and hung a shingle out. And surprisingly, many of the men came in out of curiosity to see who I was and what was going on and have a general talk with me, and a pretty nice business flourished from those preliminary discussions. But oddly enough, the worst that I had to fight, the worst discrimination that I had to fight and live with, came from other women. The men, the husbands, when they would come in with a lease or a will or a contract of some kind, or a bid on a contract, they would tell me what their wives said. And that's how I knew that so many of the women were actually discriminating against other women in a profession. And that's very amazing. And I'm glad and happy to see that there's a change of attitude now and that so many women are lawyers today. We have 3 more in our office in the civil division. There's an innumerable number in the criminal division, and they're all doing a good job. And I make it my business to get acquainted with them and welcome them and treat them nicely. I like to treat them as well as I would like other people to treat my daughters.
We'll be back in a moment and we'll talk further about the amazing career of Rose Silver. Rose Silver is my very special guest this evening. Rose is counsel to the Board of Supervisors. Rose was the first woman graduate of the U of A Law School. Rose was county attorney, and you were a million other things during your career. But let's take you back right around the time that you graduated law school. Then what did you start doing besides your regular practice?
Well, I started, we came out here, my husband and I were childhood sweethearts, and he fell sick in medical school with tuberculosis, and I went to the University of Detroit Law School. He wasn't doing very well physically, and it came time to change him to another climate. So some friends of the Silvers had just come from Tucson, and they spoke very highly of Tucson. I didn't know how to spell Tucson. I didn't know such a place existed. I thought Arizona was one of the 48 states in a geography lesson. And so we came out here because he refused to leave unless I would accompany them. So my father and mother permitted me to go along because he was given 6 weeks' time to live, and they figured I'd be back in 6 or 8 weeks. But as it turned out, he died, my husband died 7 years ago, and he lived here for 48 years. I found it quite difficult to study alone for the bar, so I decided that if I passed and got out and went to work, I would start teaching the bar review courses so that other people following me to take the bar would have someone to study with.
You mean you initiated the bar review?
I initiated the bar review courses here.
I just thought you were going to tell me a story about when you were teaching it, but you are the initiator.
I initiated the bar review course here, and I had quite a following. One of my earliest students was Dennis DeConcini's father. I went to school with Ivo DeConcini. And my husband, who was ill at the time and was engaged in no business whatsoever, sat in on these bar review courses and took notes for me and typed them up for me, and we discussed the various facets, and he learned well enough so that he became the first lawyer admitted to the Arizona Supreme Court to practice without having gone to law school. One of the first. He wasn't the first. And so we started up a law practice together. But up to this time, I had been working for John Van Buskirk, an outstanding criminal lawyer. And wherever I worked, they were so discriminatory against women lawyers that they didn't even put my name on my papers. I had to work under their names. So that was, but that was bearable. Anyway, while my husband was studying for the bar, he was sitting in our dining room one day with a lot of books in front of him and papers in front of him, and my second daughter, who is now 46 years old, and she was about 7 or 8 at the time, was running from the kitchen, from the living room to the kitchen to get a drink of water. She passed the dining room where he was sitting with a group of books and studying. So she asked him, "Daddy, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm studying for the bar." She said, "The bar? What's that?" He said, "Well, I want to be a lawyer." So she started to go on, then thought better of it and turned around and looked at him and said, "What, a man lawyer?"
I love that story. Well, right after that, in chronological order, didn't you have a famous case in Pinal County?
Yes, it was a very famous murder case. I've forgotten the name of it, and I've forgotten the person that was accused. He was an itinerant worker. And in Pinal County, there used to be great fights for water holes for the cattle. So there was always quarrels between them. Finally, this man whom I represented, we represented, Mr. Van Buskirk and I represented him. Finally, it came time to pick a jury. And the courts at that time were open on Saturday. And that was a gathering place for all the farmers and the cattle ranchers from Florence and from Coolidge. They got together there, and they had a regular free-for-all get-together affair. And in the meantime, they were picking people from that group for the jury. They finally impaneled a jury. But I remembered that the jury panel was not sworn in. Because of the commotion and the good times, somebody forgot to swear the jury in. So I let the trial go to its conclusion, knowing this man was going to be convicted because it was a set-up deal. And we moved to set the verdict aside on the grounds that the jury panel had not been sworn. And the judge, the judge at that time was McFarland, who later became senator and later became Supreme Court judge and governor, every honor, political honor that could be bestowed upon him. He was so nervous. He had a habit when he got nervous of pulling his tie and doing like this. He got so nervous, and he looked at the prosecutor and said, well, there are two ways of doing this thing, the right way and the wrong way. You've evidently done it the wrong way. And he had to dismiss the jury, and he had to grant a directed verdict. We finally worked out a deal for this man that he would not be tried again, because you see, the jury panel wasn't sworn and a witness wasn't sworn. Therefore, double jeopardy didn't attach. So he could have been tried again. So we worked out a deal where he would leave for Texas, and we would dismiss the charges. But Judge McFarland called me into his chambers and said, well, why didn't you tell us about this before? I said, well, I was paid to represent this man and to help save his life, not to teach anybody what the law was.
And while you were doing this, you also had a small child, didn't you?
Yes.
That you had taken along because...
I took my baby girl along with me, and one of the clerks in the library there took care of her while I was trying the cases. And I actually lived in Florence for the week of the trial.
Well, you also were nursing that child at the time.
So whenever it was necessary to nurse her, I would leave the courtroom and nurse her.
We'll be back in a moment with more Rose Silver stories. Rose Silver is my guest, and Rose was the county attorney. Rose is now special counsel to the Board of Supervisors. Rose, we left your career when you were working with Van Buskirk, and you mentioned that he wasn't in the office a lot.
No, Van Buskirk was John Van Buskirk was one of the outstanding lawyers of Pima County. And
now this is back what?
This is back in the late 20s and the early 30s, and up to about the mid-30s.
And this was the school named after him? Van Buskirk
No, it
School?
was named after the family. Yes, after his sister primarily, who was a teacher. He was known by everybody as being in love with pool. He was a self-made man. He didn't have even a high school education, passed the bar, and was an outstanding lawyer. and he used to play pool all the time. And I worked for him, and I got to do all the work, which was very good for me. But one of the things that was understood, that I had to do everything under his name. I couldn't use my name, because he was afraid that the use of a woman's name would detract from the business. What business it would detract from him, I couldn't know, because he was never in the office to handle it. Well, then a call came in from the jail that Dillinger had been picked up, and he wants representation.
You mean the John Dillinger?
The John Dillinger. And so I said, well, Mr. Van Busker's not available. I don't know where to get him. Ask Dillinger if he's willing to talk to a lady lawyer. And the word came back, by all means, yes, send her up. So I came.
He may have been an outlaw and a murderer, but he was not a chauvinist pig.
Yeah, no, he wasn't. And he was pretty nice to deal with, too. I talked to him about what he wanted. He knew that he was going to be extradited. By this time, he had killed the sheriff and his wife in Ohio. And but he had $20,000 on him, because he had come with about 6 or 7 of his henchmen, and they're women, and he wanted to leave some money for them. So he said, and he had also was served with a writ of attachment on that $20,000 by an insurance company who had gone his bond. And I said, well, I can't do anything for you criminally, but civilly, maybe, because you're going to be extradited. We had the Governor's Extradition Act was in existence, but at that time it wasn't mandatory on the governor. You could dally and dilly along and save time by objecting to the extradition papers, which I thought I might do, but then considering the fact that he was a murderer, it was going to do him no good, so I didn't do any of that. But I did file a motion for Mr. Van Busker, for Dillinger, saying that the $20,000 was in the custody of the sheriff. We call it in custodia legis, the Latin for in the custody of the law, and is not subject to attachment. And also, I had a weird idea that if you went ahead and attached this money and segregated it to the attachment, it would upset the currency of the realm.
Currency of the realm.
And
what does that mean, Rose?
I don't know. And the judge went for it, and we saved that money for him.
And then you mentioned to me that somebody tried that same trick in California.
The next day I read a California case where the lawyer raised almost the same point, and the judge didn't go for it.
Threw it out.
Yeah.
We'll be back in a moment with Rose Silver. Rose Silver and I have been sitting here chatting. Before you leave the Dillinger story, how did they happen to catch Dillinger?
Well, Dillinger and his girl stayed at a private boarding house, but the other 6 or 7 of them and their ladies stayed at the Roosevelt Hotel, or some hotel on North 6th Avenue. And the hotel burned. It went on fire. And one of the firemen who came, who used to read these murder cases and Wild West stories, recognized one of the people, and he called the police, and that's how that led to Dillinger, and that's how he was picked up here.
Now we've got you at your beginning career, and then let's, just to save time, say that your husband became an attorney and that you both practiced successfully for many years, and so on and so forth. Now take us to the time when you started working for the county attorney.
Well, by this time, my oldest daughter is married to a lawyer, and what do you do with a daughter's husband who has no other profession except that? We asked him if he would go to law school. He became a lawyer, and he came into the office. So now I had 2 bosses, and every time
your husband and your son-in-law.
My husband and my son-in-law. And every time they got a case where there was definitely no pay to it and definitely very hard to find any hope of success, they'd call me and say, "Mother, we've got a case now that's right up your alley." So I knew I was stuck. with something that isn't going to pay off. And in due time, I got a little tired of it. And I said, you two are getting along fine. And I have a bid from Norman Green, who's running for county attorney, to run the civil division for him, and I've accepted it. Also, I'll be able to have my own check, because when I asked my husband to give me a salary, he said, well, you have a checking account, you can write a check for whatever amount you want. Well, I said, that's not the same. So I just left and have been with the county ever since. That was 20 years ago.
And meantime, you had a total of how many children?
5 children.
Okay, so then you were with the county attorney's office. Now, how did you end up as county attorney?
Bill Schaefer had been elected county attorney. And shortly after his election, I think within a couple of months after his election, he resigned. So there was a vacancy there.
And for those people that don't remember, he was a fine attorney, but he never was cut out for politics. So that's
absolutely. He was a good lawyer and a fine man, but politics didn't interest him. And oddly enough, that year he got the greatest number of votes that year. Well, the position was open, and Lars Peterson wanted to try for it, and he was working in the office. So I said, Lars, do you object if I write a letter to the board that in the event you're not appointed, would they appoint me? Well, Lars Peterson wasn't appointed, and I was appointed.
And who was the other person that applied for that job?
And Dennis DeConcini applied for it.
And of course, Dennis is now our senator. Names keep repeating themselves. Dennis and Lars squared off for the Senate position in the primary not too many years back. Tell us how you worked with Sandra Day O'Connor.
Well, when I was county attorney, I had charge of the civil division and the criminal division. We were also attorneys for the school district by law, so the work got pretty heavy, and I had to have help so that I could do a good job of the job that I was appointed to. So I called the Attorney General and told him, Gary Nelson was the Attorney General, and said, Gary, I have such and such a case, and now another one is filed that is sure to go to the Supreme Court, and we're surely going to lose that case because we're entitled to lose it. It involved the durational period of 12 months residency before you could get indigent help, medical help in the hospital. And the 12-month period was rather silly.
Okay, we're just about out of time, but
So
the upshot was
I
that
called
Sandra...
the Attorney General for help, and he sent me help. He sent Sandra O'Connor.
And that's how you met her.
And we worked for years together on cases.
It's been absolutely delightful. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on Talk It Over.
Ellen's Hair and Nails, done by Great Lakes Salon, 2540 North Tucson Boulevard.